Good afternoon from wherever you're joining us, and so lovely to have you join us this afternoon. My name is Bonnie Tunya, and I invite you to a great conversation. Now, if you're just tuned in, this is a conversation that looks at trade, more importantly, about how interconnected our lives are as inhabitants of this continent, and mostly how do we build our continent going forward. This is a conversation by the Afrasia Bank, the EDB, and Axis Fiduciary that will be looking at the question of supporting Kenya's economic growth and wealth stewardship. Now, let me throw in some few numbers because I like numbers and I work as a financial journalist. 9% is the overall FDI into Africa, and this is mediated through Mauritius. Now, you'll hear Mauritius a lot in this conversation, and it's because of the unique properties that Mauritius has as a destination for business, but also as a destination and a jurisdiction for work, play, and living. And so this afternoon, we'll be trying to look at what is it that is working for Mauritius, but more importantly, how can it work for the rest of Africa as we explore the country's increasing importance as a commercial capital for investment, trade, business, and life. Life is something that we forget about, and I think the COVID-19 has been a great reminder that as we pursue trade and investment in business, there's also life, and Mauritius offers that. And so for the next 60 minutes or so, we'll try to wrap our minds around several questions. Key among them will be just looking at Mauritius as an IFC and its jurisdiction and what it offers to the rest of the African continent. We'll be looking also at just the question of premium visa and how to work and live and what are those real opportunities thereof. Also, there's a never-ending conversation about cross-border investment and estate planning, and that is a key conversation that a lot of the people, when I put out information that we'll be having this conversation, were interested in, and especially in Kenya. Lastly, we'll also look at what are the real banking solutions within the IFC and what can individuals and corporates and indeed high net worth individuals from across the continent benefit from this. So you're in for a fun ride. Very quickly, let me introduce very clever gentlemen who will be helping me guide this conversation. And I must apologize. We don't have a lady on the panel today, but we have gentlemen who will be guiding us this conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. 𝐒𝐿 from the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. Also joining us is Mr. Asad Abdulatif from Axis Fiduciary Limited, and my friend Ravi Teji from Afrasia Bank Limited. Later on in the conversation, we'll have Dr. James Moria. You already know him, a captain of industry and the chief executive of Centum Investments PLC in Kenya, to guide and just share his thoughts on this conversation. Gentlemen, there's a lot to be said about Mauritius, and the video that just played is testament to that, and just what it could be. And I think I'm really excited when you talk about Mauritius because it is setting up the bar really high and really a benchmark of what could be for the African continent. I'd like to start with EDB and what your role is in this, because you're really charged with carrying this vision. And really, Fahaz, let's start with what are the real opportunities and what makes Mauritius unique, obviously sitting in the role that you have of championing this initiative.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for this opportunity. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone joining us in this webinar. Firstly, as you rightly pointed out, EDB has a very important role in driving investments into the country and into really positioning Mauritius as a business hub and as an international financial center, especially for the region. So the EDB, in a nutshell, is the apex organization of the government of Mauritius that is responsible for advising the government in long-term strategic economic planning, that is responsible to function as an investment promotion agency. Therefore, it positions Mauritius as an attractive investment landscape, but also as a business hub and as a financial center. And thirdly, it is responsible for the branding of the jurisdiction across the multitude of sectors that we do promote. I won't go into details, Bonnie, but it is important for our attendees to get the gist of what really Mauritius has to offer. We have a fairly diversified economic landscape that has opportunities in various sectors, including in healthcare, manufacturing, real estate, high-end luxury immovable properties, for instance. We also have opportunities in high precision engineering, amongst others. But also we are a very vibrant and trusted international financial center. And this would form part of the pinnacle of today's intervention, at least from my side. But suffice to say that the ADB is here to promote a multitude of sectors. A number of sectors have been incentivized, especially in the last budget. I'll just give one example roughly. We have introduced what you call a premium investor certificate, which is essentially if you have a sizable investment in a country, you sit down with the ADB and we give you fiscal incentives, we give you land, we give you a number of other advantages to come and set up in Mauritius. And we are doing this specifically to try and attract big medical manufacturing facilities in Mauritius to, for instance, vaccination, and to produce vaccination for our continent. So it is a role that the government has taken quite at heart in the midst of the pandemic that we are currently facing. And the government of Mauritius has put at the disposal of whosoever manufacturing facilities across the globe trying to produce vaccines to come in Mauritius and domicile their activities and to service the continent. I know it doesn't form part of the subject matter of today, but it gives the gist of the miles that Mauritius is willing to go to at least bring affordable access to healthcare in the region. And this is our contribution to the book.
Absolutely, and thank you for setting the scene. Such an important player it already is emerging. And just if I could really just bring in Assad into this conversation. Assad, I was just looking at the numbers recently about Mauritius as I was preparing for this conversation. And across Africa, Mauritius has perhaps one of the highest contribution to its GDP coming from the financial services sector. Now, at Axios Fiduciary and a lot many of similar organizations in Mauritius, you people are really the links that actually hold this and the foundation of this. Could you paint a picture for us of the landscape in terms of financial services sector in Mauritius and in relation to what you do as Axios Fiduciary?
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. Very pleased to be with you this afternoon. I think just to continue on what Faraz has said earlier on, I think what is important for me to highlight is that Mauritius is regarded as a financial center of substance and really a bridge between, the sort of, let's call them the probably more sophisticated international financial centers and bridging really cross-border investments into Africa. And perhaps I should just start by saying that IFCs are unfortunately sometimes painted in dark colors, perhaps due to the confusion between an international financial center and a tax haven, and the general misconception about the role and the importance of international financial centers like Mauritius. And in fact, jurisdictions like Mauritius play a very legitimate and integral role in international finance and trade. And this is what justifies the figures that you've mentioned just now. And the reason is because their inherent features allow financial planning and risk management and makes possible some of the cross-border vehicles necessary for global trade. There has been a lot of people who have written on the importance of international financial centers like Mauritius, and I just thought I'd quote two of them. Professor Hines, who has written a book called International Financial Centers and the World Economy, and who had this to say. He said, the evidence indicates that offshore centers contribute to financial development and stability in neighboring countries, encouraging investment, employment, and other aspects of business development. They have salutary effects on tax competition. They promote good governance and enhance economic growth elsewhere in the world. Similarly, there is someone else who has written extensively on international financial centers. You probably would have heard of him, Professor Jason Sharman, who's also written a book, and he said more or less the same thing. You know, the role of smaller jurisdictions like Mauritius in really providing support for economic growth in developing countries. And there you can have evidence drawn from Chinese and Indian experiences where you can see that international financial centers contribute by helping domestic and foreign investors in developing the type of, you know, efficient institutions that are necessary to drive growth. So coming back to what we do as a firm, Axis Fiduciary is one of the leading owner-managed professional services firm in Mauritius. So we really accompany those investors and high net worth individuals in their journey, right? As I mentioned, Mauritius has established a very good ecosystem that is conducive to the promotion of cross-border investments and solutions to high net worth individuals in respect of their private wealth. So what we would really do is we would assist those clients to use Mauritius as an IFC for their business and corporate structuring, and also for their asset protection and estate planning needs, in a nutshell.
Right.
And we can come back to that and drill down a little bit more later on.
Absolutely. And Asad, we'll get back to just those strong institutions that you've alluded to. But let me bring in Ravi. And Ravi, when we look at that whole offering that both Asad and Feroz have spoken about, my question is simple, and I guess for Kenyans watching right now would be, from a banking and maybe structural point of view, you know, we're talking about, you know, growing Kenya's wealth, you know, wealth stewardship, and really that whole support. How exactly do we do that? What are the real practical steps of getting that?
Thank you, Boni. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ravi Teji from Afrasia Bank. On behalf of Afrasia, I would like to thank you and welcome everyone. Boni, going back to your question, from the links from what Faraz, my colleague, has said, Asad has said, in the end, you need a financial service provider, because you're talking investments, you're talking, succession planning, you're talking, in the end, it all involves money or structuring. So that's where Afrasia fits in with our partners. And Afrasia Bank is strategically based in Mauritius with a representative office in South Africa, where I'm based. The South Africa office is where we, for logistics reasons, we can travel, go see our clients, give that personal touch. Afrasia Bank develops tailored financial solutions in 4 distinct business lines, which is global business banking, where all the structures, trusts, international companies sit. Then we've got the corporate banking side, where we've got any kind of a lending or any requirements. That's we've got a department. And private banking and wealth management, which is also one of our core business, and followed by treasury and markets. So in a nutshell, again, we look at all areas of financial planning, you can call it, or what an individual or a corporate would need when it comes to managing funds, or how to go about, how do we now, after setting all this up, raise a financial institution, and that's where we add value. And within Afrasia Bank, we've got people from the continent, people who've worked extensively in the continent. So what makes us a bit different is we understand how different jurisdictions work. And talking of compliance, compliance doesn't stop, monitoring doesn't stop. It starts from where Asad sits, all the compliance up to the bank level. So in terms of giving that a surety to clients that, yeah, we are doing the right business, we are in the right, we are in the same platform, that's where we come in. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ravi. Let's get back to a point that Asad made, which I think is an important part of this conversation. Earlier this month, obviously, you were all aware of the revelation that was made by the ICJ regarding the Pandora's box, right? And a lot of not just Mauritius, but a lot of IFCs came into question because people were interchanging, an investment destination with their tax haven, and there was a lot of noise and concern about this. And I bet for a lot of viewers right now, they want to get to understand exactly how this happened and what Mauritius is and what it's not. Gentlemen, anyone can take this, but perhaps let me start with Asad. Let's just demystify that. What is the character of an IFC that Mauritius is and that you gentlemen would want to build, and that is in compliance with the law, obviously, but is actively participating in the economic development of the continent?
Yes, absolutely. I think, first of all, if you look at the Pandora Papers and you look at what the ICIJ has said itself, right, in the opening statement, actually, is that there are legitimate uses why people use international financial centers, and not everyone who uses an international financial center is a crook or a criminal. Obviously, you always will have people who will try to abuse the system, right? And I think that's applicable everywhere you go to the UK, the US, everywhere you would have people who would try to abuse the system. I think what is important to understand at the outset is that Mauritius has always been supportive of all international initiatives aimed at enhancing standards, be it in terms of governance, be it in terms of anti-money laundering, the countering of financial terrorism. The legal and regulatory framework is dynamic. There are changes that are made every year just to beef up the legal and regulatory framework. So I think that's very important. The system is such that we have across the ecosystem of the jurisdiction a lot of checks and balances just to make sure that people who use the Mauritius IFC are not really abusing the International Financial Center. Ravi mentioned it. We talk of them as gatekeepers. We are one of the main gatekeepers, right? As a fiduciary firm, we have a lot of obligations before we onboard a client to verify that client's identity, the source of funds, the source of wealth, and it doesn't stop there. We have a duty to continuously monitor transactions to make sure that everything is legitimate and is above board, right? So Mauritius is a very well-regulated jurisdiction, observance of the highest standards. But I think most importantly, where probably Mauritius has tried to differentiate itself from perhaps other offshore centers is that it is a jurisdiction of substance. We encourage clients to have proper substance in the jurisdiction and not to use the jurisdiction just for the sake of, a sort of a letterbox jurisdiction. This is not allowed. We have a lot of obligations. If you want to set up a business and make use of the Mauritian ecosystem, you also have to agree to build up substance around your activities. So to conclude, the type of jurisdiction that Mauritius has always wanted to be was a clean jurisdiction, a jurisdiction of substance, right? That creates value, not only for the clients, but also for those who work in that sector, and then by necessary extension for businesses that are operating in the domestic markets of Kenya and also other markets that we serve.
Right. Faraz, I want your opinion on this. And while you respond, Faraz, I'd like you to also address the question of, while we are talking about Mauritius and talking about the centers of substance, as Asad has mentioned them, what are those salient features of Mauritius as an IFC?
Sure, thank you, Bonnie. And I would just like to piggyback on what my friend Asad mentioned. I will not go into the details of hacked information that has been portrayed by a group of journalists. But again, I would just like to say at the very outset that there is a fundamental difference between privacy and secrecy. if I don't know how much money you have in your bank account, Bonnie, it's not because you're being secretive about it, it's rather because you're being private about it. And that kind of element is fundamental to how the world works. Now, let me piggyback again on the very fair point that Asad made. There is a lot of merit as to why international investors use financial center, and it follows your question of actually demystifying. An international financial center or a mid-financial center is here to mobilize foreign investments, to facilitate private equity funds, to intermediate funds and investments, and also to mitigate risks. And when I talk about mitigating risk, I'm going to go to jump a little bit and go about the salient features of the jurisdiction. You know, Mauritius boasts an extensive network of bilateral treaties. Those are bilateral tax treaties and bilateral investment treaties. One of our fair advantages is that Mauritius has what you call the first generation of bilateral investment treaties. Therefore, they are very much focused on investment and investor protection. The first generation of treaties was actually defined by the United Nations under the UNCITRAL rules. And those bilateral investment treaties protect against direct and indirect or creeping expropriation. It guarantees fair and equitable treatment of investments. It also provides the opportunity for investors, should they feel aggrieved, to either sue the host government in the local courts or in an international arbitration tribunal, as the World Bank's 𝐒𝐮𝐻, the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. So these are the kind of treaties that are actually used by investors to protect their investments and then to add value. And this is why they use international financial centers. And there is a lot of merit, actually, why they use that. And this brings me again to the salient features. You know, Mauritius fares well on a number of indices and has been ranked first by the World Bank Doing Business, by the Global Competitiveness Index, by the Forbes survey for best countries for doing business. And there's a reason to that. It is because the government has been successively working ever since the independence of Mauritius, have been successively working to ensure that we are on a trajectory that is here to attract investment, but also to become that viable business hub or that competitive business hub for emerging markets, principally for the African continent. And this is why Mauritius has been subject of so many internationally acclaimed rules and regulations. And then again, as Asad mentioned, as a jurisdiction, we are really at the forefront of adhering international norms, best practices, and governments. And you would see in terms of the Financial Action Task Force, we have engaged in a myriad of reforms. And at the last plenary session of the FATF, they have actually congratulated Mauritius on the substantial, and this is the word they use, when you're on the substantial and expeditious progress made by Mauritius in implementing the action plan to fight anti-money laundering and combating on financing terrorism activities. So on the AML-CFT front, we have done substantial progress. When it comes to taxation and international taxation matters, you would see that we have been whitelisted by the OECD's FHTP, which is the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, and we have also been whitelisted by the European Union's Code of Conduct Group. So
right
here you go. We have, we really, as a jurisdiction, we take this.
Right.
Bonnie,
and Faraz, thank you for yes, Asad, jump in.
No, I just wanted to interject by just perhaps talking about addressing two fallacies, right? Just to sort of make it simple. The first fallacy is that, people are using Mauritius in order to hide ill-gotten wealth. I have to say that, international financial centers like Mauritius are probably the last place you would want to do that, because we are so heavily regulated. Okay, that if you want to hide illegally gotten wealth, you wouldn't come to a place like Mauritius, because we would find out, right? That's but the bottom line, because the regulatory framework, as I mentioned earlier on, there are so many gatekeepers that you would not be able to do it, right? So that's first fallacy. The second fallacy is that, well, people are using IFCs in order to evade tax, and that's also another fallacy. People don't use Mauritius to evade tax. In fact, my experience of working with Africa is that tax is not really an issue when people are looking at structuring from Mauritius, but what they are trying to do is they are trying to mitigate the risk. Now, if you have an international investor which is looking at making an investment in a power plant in Africa, they would want to do so from a jurisdiction with an ecosystem that enables them to mitigate their risk. And here I'm talking of risk in a very wide sense. We're talking about legal risk. We're talking about, tax risk. We're talking about governance risk, So that's also a fallacy. People don't use financial centers. I mean, the reason why people use financial centers is not to, for tax evasion. Because again, the regulatory landscape is such that you wouldn't be able to do that. Okay. And what Faraz said, I think this is what tends to be portrayed sometimes in the press, and it creates that bad perception. But this is far from being the actual situation.
Right. And gentlemen, I don't want to belabor the point. I'm already seeing lots of engagement on the chat box. But you both have mentioned something very important, and there's the fact that all the safeguards that Faraz has talked about basically make Mauritius to be an investment destination of choice for the developing world. So let's talk about the developing world and in respect to Kenya. Ravi, in the event that lots of Kenyan companies and individuals are setting up and doing business with Mauritius, there is an anticipated wealth migration. And a lot of, especially the policymakers in Kenya, stand worried about this, because while it's favorable and it's enabling business for individual, does Kenya stand to gain or lose in the event of wealth migration, Ravi?
Thank you, Bonnie. Just to touch on a few points on what my colleagues Faraz and Asad have said on the Mauritian legal system and tax haven, evasion of tax. I mean, the distinguished feature of tax haven is lack of secrecy, lack of transparency and secrecy, which in Mauritius is due to exchange of information, legal disclosures, impossible. So that's number one. Coming back to your question, Africa is a hinterland for Mauritius, including Kenya. So Mauritius is well positioned to receive capital, which needs to be deployed. So that's where the that's where the jurisdiction takes advantage of. If you look at Kenya, is Kenya losing out? No, that money or money from other countries that needs to be invested into Kenya is going to create an opportunity for the country. So that's how we look at it. It's not just taking money out of Kenya, or no, we don't do that. What we look at doing is Mauritius is an advisor to investors who are looking at jurisdictions where, yes, they can have a sound investment. And then from there, Mauritius will advise them and where the investments needs to be rooted. What are the legals? Right. What's the banking channel? Is there exchange controls? What's the law? What are the physical advantages? So that's where, in terms of losing out, no, I don't think so.
Right.
Thank you.
And gentlemen, before we move too further on, I'll be just looking at the questions in the chat box, and there's a persistent question that has been asked by, I think, 3 or 4 by Abdulatif, by Stephen Langat, and I think somebody else on the question of the blacklisting by the EU. I think let's just dispense with that and move on very quickly. I don't know if Faraz, you want to take that real quick?
Sure, happy to take that one, Bernie. Let me go back to the starting point. Mauritius was being reviewed by the regional body of the Financial Action Task Force, which is the 𝐸SAMLAG. At the level of 𝐸SAMLAG, we started reviewing the AML CFT systems, or what really is the legal systems in Mauritius for combating the financing of terrorism and for preventing money laundering in a country. Now, they had a parameter that they were using comprising 40 action items, and they were reviewing Mauritius. At that time, when they started reviewing Mauritius, they also placed Mauritius in what you call the 𝐼CRJ, International Corporation Review of the FATF. And then we started being assessed by the FATF in both the legal system that we have and the effectiveness of the legal system. Now, we were being assessed, the FATF prepared an action plan for Mauritius, asking Mauritius to actually implement certain reforms by 2022. Now, we were given that timeline, and we were going about that. They also asked Mauritius to provide a high-level political commitment to ensure that we are not placed on their dark gray list. Therefore, the FATF has a light gray list, a dark gray list, and a red list. The red list is a couple of countries that have systems that are quite obscure. The light gray list of countries that have deficiencies in their AML/CFT regimes, but they have provided strong political commitment. And then you have the dark gray list, which are basically countries that have strategic deficiencies, but they have not provided political commitments to address them. So Mauritius was in the light gray list, and then there was political commitment, and then we had until 2022. But come last year, the European Union made its own list by virtue of an empowerment that they received from the European Parliament. Now, they did that by taking the FATF's list, and they merged all the three lists and prepared a single list. So even though Mauritius was in a list of countries which are being monitored for AML/CFT purposes, from EU's point of view, we were in a list with deficiencies on AML/CFT regime. Therefore, we were placed on the EU's blacklist last year. So the government of Mauritius said, okay, we have until 2022, but we are not going to wait until 2022. We are going to prepone all our action items. And actually, as at date, we have already completed all the 40 recommendations of the FATF and all the immediate outcomes. There are 5 immediate outcomes, and we have already completed all the immediate outcomes when it comes to effectiveness of our AML/CFT regime. Now, right. Mauritius is being assessed by the plenary session of the FATF as we speak. Once we go out of the FATF list, it will be axiomatic or automatic that we will go out of the EU list within 3 to 6 weeks. This is a commitment of the European Union because they actually built upon the FATF's list. But the reform will have to be brought at the level of the FATF, which we are doing. And once we exit the FATF's light gray list, we will consequently exit without any top-up requirements the EU's blacklist within 3 to 6 weeks because they have to gazette it in Brussels.
Right. Great. And I think that's very clear. Langat, if you're watching, I hope that answer was well received. Ravi, let's just move this a little bit further in terms of the important role that then Mauritius plays. You're looking at it as a gateway for capital into the continent, and obviously being used to then channel this capital to the areas that are most at need. Could you just give us a sense of where Mauritius is in playing that role, but also if you could look into your crystal ball, what are the real opportunities thereof, in terms of the role it does play? I see you smiling. You do have a crystal ball. So let's
I'm looking for the crystal ball.
Go for it.
No, like I said, Boni, thank you. Africa is the hinterland for Mauritius. Being recipient of wealth and having a deep understanding of Africa, which is key, not many financial centers or institutions have that. is where Mauritius adds, banks in Mauritius, advisors in Mauritius like Asad, EDB add the value of where to invest, advice, and depending on the investor's risk, I mean, then the decisions are made. So what's the advantage of that? I mean, we know Kenya has flourished, done well. Many international companies have come in wherever they've been structured from. So that's a positive. So this is the positive that we look out for when it comes to how can Mauritius accelerate job creation, employment, investments, and what do why would an investor choose Mauritius? Because of the features that my colleagues have talked about, the legals, the law, the structuring, the transparency. So all that is very key for anybody to put a dollar in it and then take that dollar to a jurisdiction they know of, but they don't know of the rules and laws and exchange controls and how can we go about it? What's the right structure? What is tax efficient? So that's where, like I said, it's I see with my experience with working in Mauritius and the Mauritius banking sector, structuring sector, Africa has benefited in a good way because we've seen a lot of investment flows in, and then depending on the risk that the investor goes back to where it's needed to be invested.
Fantastic. Right, gentlemen, I've seen quite a number of questions on the chat box, and I'd like us to address as many as possible. But I also do understand Dr. James Moray has just joined the call. So as I wait for Dr. James Moray to just cool down and set his camera on, I'd like to put out a question that has been asked by Paul Sang, and then we'll get to Dr. Moria. And I'm Dr. Kenya, and I'm interested in scouting for a Mauritian funds provider or lender that offers long-term. Ravi, you want to take this?
Sorry, I didn't get the question right. Can you?
I'll take that again. So Paul Sang, writing from Nairobi, from Kenya rather, says he is a player in the beef and livestock sector, and he is interested in scouting for a Mauritian funds provider or a lender.
I mean, everything is risk related, and like the bank has its own appetite to risk. So do we lend? Yes, we do, but we need to look at the risk relation, the business risk. Based on that, we can price it. But the answer is not, yes, we will lend you, don't worry. It's a process and procedure that we need to go through to see how, I mean, look at the Kenyan banks, they become very hard. I mean, Dr. Moria will tell us to borrow money from. It's so, I mean, we are outside Kenya. So, we are at a larger risk. Whereas if the local banks are doing a lot of due diligence, understanding the cash flows, it's difficult for an international lender. Will have to do enhanced due diligence to make sure that the bank's risk is secured and yes, your business grows.
Right. And while you still have the microphone, Ravi, there's another question from James Macharia also writing and saying, what is the ticket size when it comes to funding?
Depends. I mean, I can tell you $5 million, $10 million, but it all depends. It's not a ballpark. It's like I said, it's the beginning that we need to understand where the money is going. What is it for? Do we have the appetite or not? Does the bank have the risk appetite? What does the due diligence look like? What does the cash flow look like? So that's the first step that we look at before we even commit to what's the minimum and maximum.
Fantastic. I think, gentlemen, this would be a good time to just shift gears and welcome Dr. Moria on the call. If you do not know Dr. James Moria, he is the Chief Executive Officer of Centum Investments PLC, Captain of Industry in Kenya, and obviously Centum has gone to do a lot of trailblazing investments on the African continent. Dr. Moria, we've spent about 40 minutes of just trying to wrap our minds around the question of how does Mauritius promote wealth creation on the continent and wealth stewardship. And we've also addressed the misconceptions, we've addressed possibilities, and also we've spent time to look at the safeguards that have been set up by authorities and systems in Mauritius. Joining the conversation, Dr. Moria, our interest would first be if you could just share with us your experience in using, and your organization's experience thereof, in using Mauritius as an IFC.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. It's a pleasure for me to be on this call. I see many familiar faces on the webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. So just in terms of introduction, Centum is an investment company, and we invest across the continent. And our business model is to create investment opportunities of scale and bring other investors. And these investors are from across the globe, and these opportunities are from across Africa. And that was a strategy we came up with way back in 2008, 2009. And at that time, we asked ourselves a question: what would be the best jurisdiction to operate from? Largely because you now have investors from different countries, not just Kenyan investors, and they need a jurisdiction that they understand and they're happy to put their capital through, because the investment agreements will be governed by that jurisdiction. So if, say, you're coming to partner with Centum and you're from the UK and we are proposing to domicile the holding company in Kenya, the concern you may have is that if we use Kenyan law, you may not be favored. And many of these investors may also not understand the jurisdiction. So, then we looked at many jurisdictions. We got consultants to look at many, and we ended up in Mauritius. One reason was because of precisely that, the legal predictability of the legal environment and understanding of the legal environment by investors from across different jurisdictions. So say you're coming in from China, from South Africa, from the UK, from the Middle East, Mauritius has a very good level of understanding, and investors have confidence in Mauritius. So it has made sense for us to domicile many of our holding companies in Mauritius for that particular reason. The second reason is predictability. You see, when you put in your money as an investor and you're expecting a capital gain of 2x, you don't want to be in a jurisdiction where midstream the capital gains tax will change, move from 5% to 30% to come down. Investors value predictability. And Mauritius has offered that. We've been in that, operating there for the last 10 years, and it's been largely a very predictable, environment. Now, just on the issue of tax, because I got a bit of the conversation, I'll give you a practical example. Some of the companies that run in Kenya here, we have domiciled. The holding companies are sitting in Mauritius. Now, the taxation is at the operating company level. Sometimes when it's a branch, it's actually higher. So for a branch, we pay that 7.5%. So there's actually no tax loss to Kenya by domiciling the holdco in Mauritius. There's no loss at all. So for branches, we pay that 7.5%. If it's a subsidiary, if you have a holding company and then you have a subsidiary in Kenya, you then have a tax at the same 30%. So there's really no tax advantage that you're domiciled in Mauritius. The advantage is at the point when you want to exit your investment, the investor wants to know that they're in a jurisdiction where the incoming investor is comfortable coming into. For the life of your investment together, if you have a dispute, it will be heard fairly, and whatever taxes arise out of that capital transaction, there's some predictability in the tax regime. So the law, the fiscal advantages, and of course the service providers, some of whom are here, that is part of what made us choose Mauritius over a number of other jurisdictions.
Right. Dr. Mori, just one quick question, and I just want to relate to the question that was asked earlier by James Macharia about the ticket size. And there's a perception that it's a lot easier for the big boys to do business with Mauritius, for example, like yourself. How about smaller entrepreneurs who are saying, I want to take advantage of this fiscal advantages on taxation and whatnot? Is there room for the smaller players to take a piece of this cake?
I think, Bonnie, it makes sense if you're going to use it as a jurisdiction to domicile an entity that is going to tap capital from not just Kenya. If, say, your entity is a purely Kenyan entity, all your investors are Kenyan, then it's fine. Just do it in Kenya, because a lot of these things people understand. But if your entity is such that you may need to exit to, or you may at some point want to partner with an investor from outside Kenya, or you may want to operate in more than one jurisdiction operationally because of the double tax agreements, then it makes sense to go to Mauritius as a whole core. Now, I think Assad is better placed to explain this. There are different categories of companies. So depending on the size of the company. So he'll tell you that we've had even greenfield companies set up there in a different category. And as you scale up, sort of, you move to the different category. But what determines where we domicile is really the strategy around the capital structure of the company and where you're sourcing your capital from.
Right. And gentlemen, just stay on the line because I just want to field questions. We just have about 12 minutes to landing. So I'd like to share and field some questions to you. Yes, Faraz, quick.
Sorry. With your permission, can I just touch a bit on a very fine point that James made with regard to taxation and no capital loss, no taxation loss or taxation revenue loss at the level of Kenya. Actually, he's absolutely right. And let me share with you, and that would be important for our attendees as well. You know, there was a petition filed in the Supreme Court of Kenya on the Kenya-Mauritius Double Taxation Avoidance Treaty on the 3rd of October, 2014. The Supreme Court delivered its judgment on the 15th of March. And actually, the Supreme Court rejected all the arguments put forward by Tax Justice Network that Mauritius is a tax haven, and that the DTA between Mauritius and Kenya, it will lead to substantial revenue loss. And if you look at paragraph 38 of that judgment, the Kenya High Court ruled that the petitioner, it lacked specifics in terms of statistics, and that it was not able to substantiate the allegations of tax evasion or round tripping through Mauritius because of the Mauritius-Kenya DTA. And I think that has been on the minds of a number of investors, predominantly from Kenya. But I wanted to take that opportunity because James made the very fine point, and just piggyback on it to say that actually even the judgment of the Kenya High Court corroborates with the assertion of James.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let me throw in a couple of questions. I'll start with Ravi. There are questions for you, very easy ones. The Rosne Christian is asking, is Afresia Bank present in Kenya? And the same question by Sang Paul, who says, does Afresia have a desk in Nairobi for further personalized conversations around the spectrum of financial structuring and credit markets?
Thank you for the question. No, we don't have an office in Nairobi, but I think I live in Nairobi. I'm always there. So I would request that you could go on our website. You can find my details. Send me an email, and I'll tell you when I'm tripping back home. And we'll have a conversation. So
fantastic.
The reason why we have this office in South Africa is so that the representatives here can travel to different countries, and I predominantly I'm very active in the East Africa market, so we'll come to you.
Okay. And so for Paul and Christian, just stay on the chat. You will get the contacts of how to reach Afresia sent to you. There's a question from James Kanga, who is asking, as an international financial center, how does such an organization like, for example, Ruaraka Business Community, a business membership organization, stand to benefit from Mauritius in terms of boosting business? Who wants to go for
that? So not familiar with is it a business association? Is it a cooperative?
So basically the question is, how does a member organization, a business member organization in Kenya, benefit from Afresia?
Perhaps I have a
yes.
Yes, I said.
I pretty much like what James mentioned earlier on. I think it's all about making sure that people who are operating within the business community knows what Mauritius is all about and how it can help them if ever they're looking at, especially internationalizing, which is what James said. If you are a domestic entrepreneur business, but you're looking at expansion, be it in terms of opening up your capital to foreign, investors, or if you're looking at regional expansion, that's where having a structure in Mauritius makes sense. And I think for business communities like the one that has just been mentioned, I'm sure their members may find it useful to have a bit more awareness of what Mauritius offers. So I think that's where perhaps linking up with the EDB might be a very good idea. So that together, maybe we can participate in events where we create the awareness and we tell these entrepreneurs what we can do in order to assist them in their development plans.
Right. Asad, sorry to cut you short because I'm trying to move this and get in as many questions as possible. There's a question which I think, Dr. Moura, you might help answer, seeing as you've invested in real estate. And this is a question from James Mashari again, who says, how can Afrasia Bank and indeed the relationship with Mauritius support businesses interested in doing affordable housing in Kenya in terms of funding?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is, if you want to raise capital internationally, equity capital especially, Mauritius is an attractive jurisdiction to domicile your holding company. So if you're going to have an operation here, why is it attractive is because many investors from different jurisdictions understand it and they're comfortable with the legal environment. So if you want to solve it, then it makes sense to go through Mauritius. Now, of course, if you set up in Mauritius, you then need to have a bank. So that's where Afrasia comes in, because then capital will come in through your bank in Mauritius, and then it will be channeled now to your operations in Kenya. And you can decide whether you want Kenya to be a branch of Mauritius or whether you want the Kenyan entity to be a subsidiary of Mauritius. So that's sort of how it would be helpful. Countries like India, the Middle East, where the investors who understand affordable housing, they also understand Mauritius quite well. So you're not explaining to them a jurisdiction they're not familiar.
Okay, great. There's also quite some questions regarding the tax incentives. I don't know if Asad, you just want to mention this in passing. Rosne Christian is asking, where do we obtain the list of different tax incentives offered? But basically, if you could just brush through some of the tax incentives that are available.
Well, I'd be very happy to also take it offline if the person could contact me. But in a nutshell, Mauritius offers two types of companies for cross-border investments. There is one type of company which is called the authorized company, which is considered not to be resident for tax purposes in Mauritius because it's managed outside of Mauritius and it's therefore not subject to corporate taxation in Mauritius. And there is a second type of company which is called a global business company, which is more suitable where clients are looking at investing in a country where there is a double taxation agreement. And that particular type of company is taxed at the headline rate of 15%, but there are mechanisms to exempt certain categories of income from taxation, which normally reduces the rate of taxation to anything between 0 to 3%. So that's in a nutshell.
And but you can share the information later.
Yeah, as James was mentioning, the choice between the authorized and the GPC would be taken after a discussion with the client and in order to meet their specific requirements.
Fantastic.
And we can take that offline because I wouldn't be able to cover that in 30 seconds.
Thank you. Asad, I just want to throw in some questions for you. I believe this is yours. Pratul Shah is asking, would you like to briefly share details or just talk a little bit about estate planning?
Yes, very quickly. Hi, Pratul. As I mentioned earlier on, the second reason why people tend to use a jurisdiction like Mauritius is to protect and preserve wealth. I think the background to it is, that famous proverb which says that the wealth of a family never lasts for more than 3 generations, right? because young family members might be ill-prepared or unwilling to shoulder the responsibility of wealth stewardship, bad investment decision, taxes, natural dilution of assets, and so on and so forth. And the reasons why Mauritius is an interesting place for estate planning is because it has got, first of all, the products that tend to be used for asset protection and wealth planning, namely trusts in particular, but also foundations, which are really the most important estate planning tools that are used by high net worth individuals to preserve and protect their assets. And typically, therefore, a high net worth individual would use a Mauritian trust or a Mauritian foundation to hold their assets, and then these assets would then be held, administered, managed, and then passed over to successive generations in the most not only tax efficient manner, but taking into account the intentions of the client, their wishes, charitable objectives, etc.
Gentlemen,
and again,
we definitely,
for lack of time, it might be a bit challenging to say more. But again, happy to take that offline.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, we really need to bring this to a landing. There are so many questions on the chat box, and the team at Avresia will like to answer all those. So you will get an email with all the contacts and all the questions you've asked sent to you after this. A lot of the questions would be like personal interventions and whatnot. So we will have an opportunity for you to just get that very personalized response to some of your questions. I also want to let you know that if you caught this conversation midway, there will be a replay that will be happening on the social media platforms. So just look out for that, and you're able to follow all the conversations through. If you need contacts to any of the speakers, again, reach out through the chat box, and the good people at Avresia Bank would be very happy to share that information with you. Gentlemen, it's been a fantastic 60 minutes trying to wrap our minds around this question, and I think we've made it a lot clearer now of the real opportunities that exist between Kenya and Mauritius, and the real tangible, practical opportunities that do exist in this. And my challenge to you would be to jump on them. Also allow me to thank my panelists very quickly: Asad Abdulatif, Ravi Teji, Faraz Rajid, and Dr. James Moria for joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon.